The night she said he shut her out, I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. It wasn't just sadness. It was the quiet collapse of someone who had finally run out of ways to pretend they were okay. We were sitting on the cold concrete steps outside my apartment building, the streetlight above us flickering like it couldn't decide whether to stay or give up. Her hands were trembling, not dramatically, not in a way that demanded attention, but in that small, heartbreaking way that tells you someone has been holding everything in for far too long. And when she admitted that he had shut her out of his life as if she had never mattered, I felt something inside me harden with resolve. In that moment, I promised myself that no matter what happened, I would never shut her out. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in standing by the people who need you most, take a moment right now to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this matter because they remind us who we can be for each other. Her name was Alina, and she had been my best friend since we were children who still believed scraped knees were the worst pain in the world. We grew up on the same street, rode the same school bus, and shared secrets under the old mango tree behind her house. Back then, heartbreak meant losing a game or failing a math test, but life has a way of growing sharper edges as we grow older. And by the time we reached our 20s, those edges had already cut her more than once. He had come into her life like a promise. Calm, attentive, patient. The kind of person who remembers your coffee order and sends good morning texts before you even open your eyes. For months, I watched her glow in a way I had never seen before. She smiled more. She dreamed out loud. She began talking about the future not as a vague concept, but as a place she could almost touch. And I let myself believe that maybe this time, she had found someone who would protect that softness in her instead of taking advantage of it. But slowly, things began to change. First, it was small. He stopped replying as quickly. Then he stopped showing up to plans. Then he stopped asking how her day was. She tried to explain it away, telling herself he was stressed, busy, distracted. I watched her shrink herself to fit into his silence. She stopped bringing up things that bothered her because she didn't want to seem demanding. She stopped asking for reassurance because she didn't want to seem insecure. And then one day, without warning, he stopped answering at all. No explanation, no closure, just absence. When she told me that he had shut her out completely, as if the months they had shared meant nothing, I felt anger rise in me like a storm. Not because he left, but because he left without giving her the dignity of truth. He let her question her worth instead of admitting his own inability to stay. The days that followed were heavy. She barely left her room. Her laughter, once loud and infectious, disappeared. I would bring her food she wouldn't eat. I would sit beside her in silence because sometimes silence feels safer than advice. I could see the war inside her. One part of her wanted to believe she wasn't enough. The other part wanted to scream that she had given everything she could. I struggled too. Being the strong one sounds noble until you realize how helpless it can feel. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to confront him. I wanted to hand her a version of herself untouched by his indifference. But healing doesn't work like that. It moves slowly, stubbornly, demanding patience. There were nights when she would stare at the ceiling and ask what she did wrong. I would remind her of all the ways she loved fiercely, honestly, without games. I would remind her that being shut out says more about the one who leaves than the one who stays. But doubt is loud, and reassurance often whispers. One evening, weeks after he disappeared, she finally broke down in a way that scared me. Not dramatic, not loud, just tears falling quietly as she admitted she felt replaceable. That word pierced me. Replaceable, as if she were an object, something easily swapped for a newer model. I realized then that heartbreak isn't just about losing someone. It's about losing the version of yourself that existed when you believed you were chosen. That night, I told her something I had never said out loud before. I told her that I would never shut her out. Not when she was messy, not when she was broken, not when she felt unlovable. I didn't promise that I would always know the right words. I didn't promise that life wouldn't pull us in different directions someday. But I promised that silence would never be my weapon against her. Keeping that promise wasn't always easy. There were days she pushed me away because she didn't want to feel like a burden. There were days when her sadness turned into irritation, and she snapped at me for trying too hard. I had to learn that loving someone through pain means not taking their temporary storms personally. It means understanding that sometimes the people who need you most will struggle to accept that you're staying. Slowly, change began to appear in the smallest ways. She started going for morning walks with me. At first, she barely spoke, but she showed up. Then she began journaling, filling pages with thoughts she had been too afraid to say out loud. One afternoon, she cleaned her room, opening the windows wide as if letting fresh air wash away old memories. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. It was quiet rebuilding. Months later, we ran into him by accident at a cafe. I saw her freeze. For a second, I feared all the progress would crumble. He looked uncomfortable, almost guilty, but he still didn't offer the apology she once craved. Instead of chasing him for answers, she simply nodded and walked away. When we stepped outside, her hands were steady. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just exhaled deeply, like someone who had finally set down a weight they had carried for too long. That was the moment I knew she was healing. What amazed me most wasn't that she stopped loving him overnight. It was that she started loving herself again. She signed up for a design course she had once been too afraid to try. She reconnected with old friends. She laughed, not because she forgot the pain, but because she realized it didn't define her. Watching her reclaim herself changed me too. I realized how often we underestimate the power of simply staying. We think grand gestures are what save people, but sometimes it's consistency. Sometimes it's answering the phone at 2 a.m. Sometimes it's sitting in silence without trying to fix what cannot be rushed. There were moments when I questioned whether my promise was too big. Life is unpredictable. People change. Circumstances shift. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered the look in her eyes that night on the concrete steps. The look of someone who feared abandonment more than heartbreak. And I chose again and again to stay. A year after he left, she celebrated her birthday surrounded by friends, music, and light. I watched her dance in the center of the room, unapologetically joyful. At one point, she caught my eye and smiled in a way that said more than words ever could. It was gratitude, yes, but it was also strength. She had survived being shut out. She had survived the silence. And she had come out not hardened, but wiser. Near the end of that night, as we sat together watching everyone else talk and laugh, she thanked me for not disappearing when she was at her lowest. I told her she never had to thank me for something that should be basic human decency. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was a choice. Every relationship is a choice. If this story has touched your heart in any way, if you've ever felt shut out or stayed up late holding someone else's broken pieces together, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of our strength. Your support helps these messages reach the people who need them most. And before we reach the end, I have a special request. In the comments, write the words "I choose to stay" if you believe in being the kind of person who doesn't walk away when things get hard. Today, when I look back on that flickering streetlight and the cold concrete steps, I don't just remember her tears. I remember the promise that formed in the quiet between us. A promise that love, in its purest form, is not about possession or romance or perfect timing. It is about presence. It is about refusing to weaponize silence. It is about choosing to keep the door open even when someone feels unworthy of walking through it. She was shut out once, and it nearly broke her. But she was also held on to, and that saved her. And maybe that's the lesson we all need. We cannot control who leaves us without explanation. We cannot force people to communicate when they choose distance. But we can control who we become in response. We can decide that we will not mirror the coldness that hurt us. We can decide that we will be safe places for the people we love. Because sometimes, the most powerful words we can offer aren't dramatic or poetic. Sometimes, they are simple and steady. I am here. I am not leaving. I will not shut you out. And in a world where doors close without warning, that promise can mean everything.